Hello and welcome to the 25th episode of Tailoring in Conversation. In this series, I'll be talking to tailors, cloth merchants, business owners, and other industry participants from all around the globe to gain a better insight into their worlds. My guest for today is Matthew Gonzalez. Matthew is a bespoke cutter who's recently started his own brand called Matthew Gonzalez. He's worked at Tom Sweeney, Dunhill, and Huntsman, and in our conversation today, we're going to be talking about the different values in tailoring, his background, and his new venture. So, I hope you enjoy. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I think we're going to discuss a lot of good things, and I should just ask you first of all how you're doing.
I'm all right. Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation too because I actually want to watch all the other interviews.
Right.
As we've already discussed, I haven't watched anything because I didn't want to be influenced by all the other great tailors you've had on. And I'm doing well. I'm a little nervous about the COVID and Christmas. Who knows what's going on there? Mm-hmm. But generally, it's been a pretty good year, and I'm looking forward to starting next year really strong.
All right, great stuff. So I'd like to know a little bit more about your background. And the question I always ask people when I am having a conversation with them is, who were you at 10 years old? So if me and you were friends or we were neighbors, which one of my friends would you be at 10 years old?
Oh, I don't know. 10 years old. I gotta think. I was a bit of like a nerdy kid at 10 years old. Right. I mean, I'm still kind of a nerdy kid now, so that doesn't, not much has changed. 10 years old. What was I doing? That was like fifth grade? Like fifth? No, this is in America. So fourth, fifth grade. Yeah. So I was just, I lived in Los Angeles. I guess, I'm sure people can tell that from my accent. But I grew up in a city called Long Beach. And the part of Long Beach I grew up in was your very garden variety American suburb. The grid streets. Everyone had a big front yard. Everyone has a big backyard. We had a pool in our backyard. Our local church was kind of the epicenter of a lot of the social events. So I went to the church school called St. Cyprian. And so 10 years old, my entire world consisted of 300 students aging from like 4 to 14. Like that was it. I could walk to school. When I was growing up, we never locked our doors. I didn't have a key to my house ever when I lived with my family up until 18. So it was kind of quite a sheltered life where you could be goofy and just talk and really be expressive. So I don't know, if you had kind of a really nerdy friend, that would be me.
So what was my nerdy friend interested in? What were the things you would talk about? What kind of posters did you have on your walls, or what sort of idols did you have, or what kind of games would we be playing?
So I never had a poster on my wall ever in my life. Yeah, I remember I have a friend, my oldest friend in the world. I would go to his house and he'd have like those cliche posters of like, whatever big celebrity at the time was, like Jennifer Love Hewitt or something like that. And I just never got that. I was never a kid with posters on the wall. Heroes. Oh, that's a really hard one to think back on. I don't even know. That's my biggest hero was my eldest brother. Right. Because when I was 7, 8, he went to one of America's military academies called the Naval Academy across the other side of the country. Yeah. And I was 7 and he left, and he was just kind of this like idol in my eyes. And so a lot of things that I did were almost based on things that he did. When he first left, he told us that he started a rowing team. So the first thing I wanted to do was become a rower. And I rowed from the age of like 13, 12, 11 years old to 18. And I still like going on a rowing machine at the gym. I wish I could get into a club. But I was fairly active. I loved to run around, really just, I would have a snarky attitude like I do now anyway, so that hasn't changed much. But in terms of idols, I would say my eldest brother, and then my second brother, who's the middle one. I wouldn't say he was an idol, but he was always there, and he really influenced how I developed as like an individual. So he is a chef, and I think that's where I got my love of cooking from.
That explains. All right. So do you have any sisters?
No, just 3 boys in the family.
All right. Okay. And did you guys get along well, or were you fighting a lot, or kind of like playing around together, or?
It's weird because the 2 elder brothers are 7 and 9 years older than me. So we had kind of just a natural distance in our relationship. The eldest went away when I was 7, so I didn't have much time with him. And then the middle brother, he stayed in Los Angeles, but again, our social circles were very different, just as a factor of our age. So he was always there, and he'd always kind of be the older brother to look out for me. But we didn't have that much overlap until much later on in life. Right.
And what about your parents?
Love my parents. I still talk to my parents, every week. I love family's a big thing for me. So the brothers, they have kids and they're, have their careers. So it's hard to keep in touch with them, but we keep in touch regularly. But parents, they love to see, I have a little boy, so they love to see pictures of him and videos of him. So we're always in touch. What's really interesting, I think, about our family is my mom was a school teacher for 40 odd years. My dad worked as an engineering kind of technician for the space shuttle program at Boeing, at the end. They never pushed a career path on us.
Right.
So you can see that by the fact that the eldest brother was in the military. He served for 20 years and retired a few years ago. Middle brother is a chef, and I'm a tailor. So we weren't like, oh, you have to follow down this career path. We really got to decide what we fell in love with and just go for it.
Right. I think that's a very important thing. I feel pretty much the same. I never remember my parents pushing me towards anything. They did guide me, though. I guess you had probably encourage you in some decisions that you make, but I don't remember that. And I think that's a very good thing. So my question then is, how on earth did you get into tailoring in the first place? Did it start in America at a young age, or was that something that happened way later?
It started in America.
And you were how old?
So I would say in my late teens, early 20s is when I first started thinking about it, but it was more fashion generally. Up until I was in high school, I liked architecture, and I was really fascinated with architecture, and I actually wanted to do an architectural program. My high school actually had an architectural, like a high school version of an architectural program. So you would learn at the time AutoCAD, you would learn how to do blueprints, make model structures. So I did 4 years of that with the intention of going on and trying to pursue a path. I went to what's called a junior college. And so for most people outside of the United States, they might not know what a junior college is. Essentially, it is a college that is only 2 years long. A normal university degree in the U.S. is a 4-year degree. So you can go to a junior college for 2 years and then transfer into a 4-year university at a 3rd-year level. And what that does is it actually minimizes the cost of going to university.
Right. So it's as if you're splitting your degree or your course or your studies into 2 different schools. something like that?
Exactly. Yeah. So what you would do is it's almost like it's publicly subsidized, but you would go there and then you can jump on into a 4-year degree and get your degree. And I did that path. I went to a community college in Orange County, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, I'm going to take a sewing class just to learn how to sew." And I thought, why not? I was always interested in clothing and what I wore, but I never did the practical side.
Right.
And I just made a lot of friends instantly. Really loved the teachers, really encouraging, and it really was a format and a medium for me that I could realize something very quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas the architecture that I was studying before was really long-term thinking and, master planning all the way out. And I decided not to pursue that anymore and go into fashion. And from there it was, let's do an alterations class and then let's do a tailoring class. And I got a job as an alteration tailor at a department store in Orange County, and was working there for a couple of years. And then I moved to London. So
I have 2 questions. The first question is, did you have any artisans or craftsmen in your family?
Not that if you consider the middle brother, I would say, cooking. But other than that, there was kind of some restaurateurs on my dad's side, but I never met them. So none that I've ever known of or met.
Okay. And my second question is, I guess it's 2 questions. How was the course that you attended in America, and why didn't you try to find a tailor to work with in America? Why did you move to Savile Row?
I'd say there was a few reasons. One, the romance of like moving to Europe or to London was a big draw. The course at Orange County, it's called OCC, or Orange Coast College. The course there, because it was situated in Orange County, was really trying to develop talent for surf brands. So Hurley was based out of Orange County. Like Quicksilver has an office there. Vans, Fox, all these active sportswear surfing brands. Oakley is there. And we would get guest speakers coming in talking about how, and it was this like total cliche Orange County kind of guys coming in being like, I designed for Hurley. I have my surfboard in my office. So at lunch, I just go out for an hour or two, come back, finish off the day. Like it was really that kind of environment. And I like being casual often, but I didn't want to pursue that as a career. I liked the history of tailoring. One of the things that really interested me was if you take away the use of an electric sewing machine, really the techniques haven't changed 150, 175 years. And I liked that connection to the past, that I could talk with a tailor from 150 years ago. And we would probably be able to communicate pretty well about the same suit. And that doesn't necessarily happen with a chef or with a doctor or with an architect, because the techniques are so advanced compared to previous generations, where we are really blue collar craftsmen that are outfitted in kind of a white collar format and presentation.
So what was the first thing you kind of like encountered when you started to research about tailoring? What was the first ideas and perhaps people that you explored and which inspired you to act and move to London?
So when I was I worked at Nordstrom, which is the department store where I was an alteration tailor. The manager of that alteration department was a Romanian tailor. So he grew up, I can't remember where in Romania, but he grew up in Romania and moved to the U.S. later in life. but he would try to show me how to draft a pair of trousers in our off time. And he would try to, show me how to hand finish a hem instead of putting it through the machine.
Mm-hmm.
And it was those early techniques that made me want to explore it more. And so then I started looking at, if there was fashion courses in London that I could apply to. And I mainly focused on London just because of the language barrier.
Right.
So
I'd like to know, you said something about, tailoring techniques haven't changed, and you can actually talk to pretty much a lot of tailors about a jacket or a trouser or something, and they would more or less be at the very least familiar with the same techniques because, they're kind of like, they have become universal and they haven't changed that much. What I want to ask you is, what is it about that you liked so specifically? Because it's a very peculiar thing to like, it's a weird thing. It's like, I like talking about universal old techniques with other tailors. Like, why do you like that? What is it about it that you like?
Well, since I think it's actually quite a universal appeal that it might be very specific in this case, but we like that idea of lineage, especially England. If we look at heritage brands, we like the connection with the past. Mm-hmm. I found something very poetic and romantic about the notion that I'm doing a craft that has long, rich history, but also that is so it evolved to a point that really hasn't been able to be improved upon. Medicine, we're always changing. We're always going to improve upon. There's always going to be dynamic people coming up with innovative ideas. Right. And that can happen in tailoring, but also there are a few ways to perfectly sew a seam. There are a few ways to perfectly construct a jacket or to make a pattern. And so for me, part of that connection with the past makes it more meditative. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but when I'm actually in my stride, where I'm just sitting at my board and I have music on and I'm just drafting a pattern, you can kind of tune the world out and you just focus in on what you're doing.
Yes.
And when I was in California, I used to think, I love that I can do this because it's been done so well so many times before. And that there is a connection. Like I am reaching back into the past to create what I'm working on right now.
Yeah. I find that very fascinating. So I'd like to go deep into this. My one question I have is, you could have chosen, for example, Japanese carpentry. They use ancient techniques, with very specific ways of creating joints. You would still be connected to a culture of the past, of perfected craft. Why was it tailoring that you chose and not some other form of craft? Why not leather making or shoe making or I don't know, whatever?
I mean, no, you're absolutely right. And it is, in the hypothetical, I could have jumped any one of those into any one of those different industries. There are a few links. If you think about my original kind of passion for architecture, there's something very structural about what we do. And if you look at a drafted pattern, you start to see elements of blueprints.
Yeah.
So, we're making all these points and we're drafting out and we're making these lines and curves. So I think that there was something that just easily translated architecture to tailoring. And also, like I said, I did like dressing up. I did like, wearing nice clothes. I did care about how I looked. So I think those elements kind of created the perfect potion for me to go into tailoring.
Do you think if your friend approached you, instead of saying, I'm going to take this sewing class, he said, I'm going to take this I don't know, carpentry class, would that have had any significant influence on you, you think?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, definitely.
Uh-huh.
Actually,
All right.
so there is a great tailor based in America, really
Mm-hmm.
cool. She's really gone beyond what we do as tailors. They were based out of Nashville. It's called her
Mm-hmm.
brand's called Harry Clothing,
Right.
and she moved to Vermont. And they like, and I don't want to like misrepresent what they do, but I feel like they've gotten connected to some community that are just learning how to make buildings by hand,
Mm-hmm.
and ancient tools of working wood and making those like dovetail joints. And
Mm.
every time I see a post on her Instagram, I'm really envious. I'd love to do something like that. So
Do you, do you watch those videos when someone goes out in the jungle and just with their bare hands create this house and like a pool and like a river and kind of like
yes,
redirects the water? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
love, I watch that stuff. I love watching cooking things. Anything that people are doing something with their hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
I find all of it really relaxing and
Mm-hmm.
meditative. And unlike architecture,
Mm-hmm.
it's you can create something almost instantly.
Yes, that's
And
the
so
good
there's
thing,
that
I think.
sense,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a sense of instant gratification that like even if you haven't made the jacket,
Mm-hmm.
if you start it, you will finish the canvas
Yeah.
in an hour or so.
Mm-hmm.
So you can hang the canvas up and you already see the structure, and then you can, in your mind's eye, build up the chest and where the
Mm-hmm.
lapel's going to roll. So
Mm-hmm.
you can see elements of it growing very quickly.
Yeah. 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 Something else you said was, which I found very interesting, is you said that tailoring was a craft unlike other crafts, and it had developed up to a point where it stopped developing, technically speaking. What did you mean by that, and why do you think that is the case?
Well, okay, there's a caveat to that. I mean, there might be better ways to make a jacket, better ways to draft or fit,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm sure we will talk about. But when you look at other industries, not necessarily crafts, craft-based industries, but like I
Mm-hmm.
said, with medical sciences, with architecture, with engineering,
Mm-hmm.
all of that technology continues to be improved upon.
Yes.
What we will think of as cutting edge today will be an antique in
Mm-hmm.
10 years. Actually, we joked the other day about how your laptop was what 6 years old and how
Vintage, yeah.
vintage. You wouldn't say that about a coat. You wouldn't say that a 6-year-old coat is vintage. The way it was made, it would still be relevant. And we actually look back often at the makers from the early 20th century and see how beautifully they made clothing.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about the craft that has been nearly perfected. It isn't perfect, but nearly perfected. And there are other industries that have the same, are the same. If you look at, like you said, woodworking, Japanese woodworking or porcelain,
Mm-hmm.
some of those kind of crafts are so highly refined
Mm-hmm.
that I don't know if they can be improved upon. And I don't want to speak for artisans in those industries, but I just don't see how you can make a more perfect canvas or a
Mm-hmm.
more perfect theme, whether it's by hand or by machine.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd
The
love to improve.
sense, yeah, yeah, yeah. The idea I get from what you say is that in general, obviously there are too many nuances if you look at every tailor specifically, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in general, there are only so many techniques that you could apply on a given thing. And since there are so many tailors and they have tried so many things on all these different compartments and different subjects, let's say, within tailoring, that if you would take an average, there isn't much more that you could really radically change and revolutionize than what we've had in the last, let's say, 300 to 400, maybe 500 years. Kind of, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say probably I wouldn't say that far back, because I think that tailoring was probably changing a lot, 500 years ago, compared to 300 years ago. But essentially, that's what I'm saying. Especially if you look at the last 200 years, the garments that were made, Victorian garments, some of the late Georgian garments. I mean, you go into the V&A and you see some of these beautiful silks, and the way they still look so pristine.
Yeah, I
think is indicative of how relevant the actual techniques still are today. Now, I remember one of the papers I had to write about for my degree was about the jacquard loom. If you look at a jacquard loom, even though from 1804, whenever it was, the process of weaving has changed dramatically, and punch cards seem so antiquated.
Yeah.
So technology changes, but the techniques that we use, because we don't really incorporate that much technology, doesn't change.
Do you think that the reason why the techniques that we use don't change that much is because we don't use a lot of technology per se, or is it just the nature of the techniques themselves? It's like there is only so many. So a weak example would be, but there are only so many ways you can create a buttonhole. So you can maybe try 200 ways of making a buttonhole, but then eventually you still, the buttonhole itself doesn't change. So you create a lot of variations unless you come up with a new buttoning system, for example. What do you think?
I think it's a combination of the two, because if you think about the fact that we limit the use of technology, meaning that you can only optimize how efficiently we're using our hands to a point. Like you're going to reach a peak where you cannot improve, the average human's dexterity or, anymore. If you look at technology, you can look at buttonhole machines.
Yes.
I'm sure there's a lot of tailors who probably just have access to a home sewing machine. And what do you do for buttonholes if you want a machine one? It's just a zigzag stitch.
Yeah.
Then we look at the next iteration of that, and it goes from a zigzag stitch to maybe a finer zigzag stitch, to where it actually almost simulates the actual kind of role of having gimp in the buttonhole. So technology will probably carry on increasing when you look at machine-made buttonholes. But ultimately, they're trying to emulate what we do by hand.
I have a lot of questions in my mind. Question number one is, it's so difficult to sort out these questions because they can take the conversation in very different directions. I'll try to keep it kind of like concentrated. So, do you think it's a bad thing that a lot of machines are trying to emulate what we do by hand, for example? Because you could like no. It's as if you say no. You say it's not a bad thing.
No, I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. I think it can be bad if a bad actor tries to sell it on or pass it on as it's made by hand.
Right.
I've had one client who I will never forget because of it. He told me he has been buying Italian bespoke for years, and he said, I love this tailor bespoke. I know all about bespoke. And I said, great. And I walked him through my process, and he tried me out for a suit and a morning suit later on. But he didn't like that I was so expensive. He's like, this is not how much bespoke should cost. And I said, I have very relatively reasonable prices. So I'm really surprised you're saying this. And he showed me one of his Italian bespoke suits, and it was just made to measure.
Oh.
So I don't know. There's obviously, because I never followed up because I didn't want to, cause a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know if he misinterpreted what the tailors were telling him, or the tailors were saying this is bespoke.
Right.
Because, yeah, it had an edge stitch that kind of simulated the hand edge stitch.
Mm-hmm.
But you flip the lapel back and you can see what it is, And I thought if you have a person who's using these machines and then passing it off as handmade to customers that might not know the difference, then that is bad.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, all you're doing is you're increasing the quality of mass-produced garments, and that can't be a bad thing.
That's true. That is true. So, what do you think of this then? If our craft is not something that is highly dependent on technology and also not really highly fueled by technology, and I mean literally the artisan's segment, so not the ready-to-wear or the made-to-measure, but really the handcrafted one. And the main majority of the techniques are kind of like on average as good as one can get. What does that what makes then what becomes really important in our craft, do you think? If technology is not the pushing factor, and it's also not the thing that is dictating the craft, and the techniques are kind of like as good as they can get on average, then what is there to aspire to, kind of, you think, within the domain of bespoke handcrafted tailoring?
What do you mean by aspire to?
So, for example, if you look at
the quality of the work, or as an individual tailor, what are they aspiring to be in the industry?
Anything, whatever you interpret my question to be in that direction. I mean, you can take it anywhere you want. I mean, look, if you look at, for example, you look at, let's take a simple, let's say road building, for example, right? I mean, I don't know much about road building, but I can assume that one of the things that would have severe impact on it is what kind of new materials do they discover? How can they process those materials into the most efficient road building way they can? And so they would probably aspire to increase efficiency, reduce material costs, and develop new materials, for example, roughly speaking. Right? What do you think in our case would be the thing to aspire to as an industry, as a craft? Like, what is the highest thing we value in tailoring?
Well, okay, so I think that you're overlaying two different ideas, because while I do believe that the best artisans in our field have been able to nearly perfect what is possible, that doesn't mean everyone can actually achieve that level of perfection. So as an individual, everyone is just trying to hit that mark.
The mastery
which
mark.
Which is incredibly difficult to do in itself. So I think that is an ambition, just to get to the level that they might want to be at. Because there are different qualities of tailors in our industry, just like there is different qualities of chefs in the food industry, different levels of surgeons in medicine.
Yes.
You get these incredible surgeons who are going to be able to do the most complicated surgeries, and you get some surgeons that might have issues with liability cases. The same is true for tailoring. You start out in tailoring as someone who's never probably held a needle or picked up chalk. It is a lifelong process to even try to touch that level of perfection that we've talked about.
What would you say makes tailoring? what I'm trying to, it's too abstract for me, not your answer, but what I'm trying to figure out is a bit too abstract for me. And so I'd like to explore that with you, actually. So, when you look at, for example, great painters, what they are trying to do, for example, is, and I'm talking about classical painters, what they're trying to do is they are trying to kind of like portray an idea through their paintings while at the same time achieve a high level of technical ability to use that then to improve or tell the story better, kind of. Right? You look at a painting and you think, had this painter had a bit more technical abilities, this painting would have been so much better. Or maybe not. I don't know. That's subjective, right? What do you think that we are trying to do as tailors? I mean, you could easily say we're trying to create a certain shape, perhaps, or give the best fit for that specific figure. What do you think is beyond that? Like, what are we really trying? The ones that are really OCD.
But the thing is that, okay, so again, I think that there is a fault in that question because I don't think there is a single purpose.
Well, lay out a few. You could lay out a few. What do you think?
We make suits for people who have issues with their body image. So you might will have a client who just wants to feel like they look better than they see themselves. Mm-hmm. That client, even though we care about the quality, might not care about the quality of the make, or that it is hand padded versus machine padded, or that it is hand buttonholes versus machine buttonholes. Mm-hmm. If you can make them feel, if you can fill them with confidence when they walk into a room or walk out of the tailor shop, then the objective for that individual suit has been met. Mm-hmm. Now, that might not be the case for everyone. If you have someone who has has no body issues or self-confidence issues, they might want something that is the manifestation of their social status. Mm-hmm. So you might want someone who only cares about the most expensive cloths, the Super 180s, the cashmere overcoats, Vicuña, mm-hmm. Blazers, because mm-hmm. it's not about a physical kind of self-conscious element. It's about wanting to prove they have the means to buy these things. Mm-hmm. You have other people who just love the craft, who just love the make, and who you've told me about a client who just loves your process mm-hmm. and could just hang out with you all day while you make. Mm-hmm. That's a different objective. Mm-hmm. We, as tailors, mm-hmm. are tasked with understanding what each client has as their objective mm-hmm. and overlaying that with our own set of principles. So mm-hmm. if you come across a guy who you could, spit and polish a suit together, but it will look good on him and he'll feel like $1 million, mm-hmm. you wouldn't compromise the quality of your make, mm-hmm. but you would just have to amalgamate those two objectives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does that sound a little bit like almost like wish fulfillment for a particular need and a particular person with a certain given technique or craft?
In a way, yeah. I think there was a coat maker who once described cutters and tailors as commercial artists. And that term always stuck with me because he said we aren't able to just create anything.
Yeah, for the sake of creation. Yeah.
Yeah. Like a painter who might just be inspired by their muse or a landscape. Mm-hmm. We have to make something that fits the specifications of the individual. And in our case, the individual has to wear this in society. So we have a lot of parameters when we make our clothing.
And that distinguishes tailors from fashion designers because they can just create for the sake of creation, right?
Some fashion designers can, others can't. You know, if you're a head designer at J. Crew or, you know, Gap, and you want, you know, a high street brand, Hackett, you can't just create for the sake of creating. If you're, you know, designing a haute couture range, then you can be more free. And but again, going back to other industries, the same is true for food. If you walked into some haute cuisine restaurant with a 3-year waiting list, you're expecting to be wowed, and you are expected to allow the chef to release their creativity. That's not the same as walking into Nando's.
No. Do you think that the human element of interacting with different types of people is part of the craft? Or do you think that's something that is essential but not part of the craft? It's something on the side because it depends on what type of client segment you're addressing or helping out or serving for that.
I say it's the latter. It's definitely essential, but not necessarily part of the craft. It depends on how loosely or generally or kind of specifically you're defining the craft. If the craft is cutting a pattern, fitting a suit, or making a jacket and trousers and fitting it and finishing it, if that's the craft, then how you act with the client isn't part of the craft. But if you look at it in terms of the service that we offer as tailors, it's certainly an essential part of the service. Because I have had clients who do not want to say anything more than hello and goodbye. Now, if I try to have a conversation with them, I'm diminishing their experience at their tailor. And even though they might like what I offer them, if I continually diminish that experience, then they will look for somewhere else where they can have both a well-made suit that they like and the experience that they're looking for. And the same is true, you know, the converse is true. If someone wants to have a chat and I just keep on shutting them down because I want to focus only on my work, then that, again, diminishes their experience.
Okay, so let's puzzle some of the thoughts together. Let's see how they fit, right? I'm really enjoying this conversation because it is an actual dialogue. We're going back and forth, and I like that. So let's say we are tailors are what was it, commercial artists, correct?
That was the term.
Okay, let's take that idea for example, right? Because there is merit in it, I think, and we say, if you're a commercial artist, then you need to translate the client's desires and wishes and needs as good as you can with the technical abilities that you've developed into a product that could make them happy and make them feel better about themselves or about even the world for that matter, right? So suppose you're not a tailor, you don't have the skills yourself, you have access to someone who has the skills, but you're very good in translating a thought into some spec sheet or a design, and then you could work with someone who has the techniques and you bring that together, client happy, right? What does that make the person who doesn't have the skills but is the one who actually meets the demand of the client?
What do you mean? I mean, are we giving them a label as are they a tailor, are they a cutter, are they a salesperson, or are you saying what is their value within the industry?
Yeah, I think labels won't be helpful. I think what I'm trying to kind of like understand, because I'm not trying to get at something. It's an open question, right? So
well, because I would say that, you know, that's just if we boil it down to two individuals, one that's great at working with a client and understanding their needs and then translating that into a spec sheet, and then the second individual who can then realize that into a tangible garment. That's just a great business. that's the perfect partnership. I wouldn't necessarily label it as anything, but what has happened in my mind is that you have taken a business that could be run by a single person and just, divvied up the workload. As you know, I am a bit of a one-man band. I don't make the clothing. I have tailors that will make, but I cut the patterns, I do the fittings, I answer all the emails, social media, all of that. And for a small business, I'm able to do that, but it's taxing and I am constantly having my attention diverted elsewhere. If I had someone who could work well with clients, who can take some of that off my board, that would potentially allow me to grow in ways that I might not be able to on my own. So really, it's just about, I guess, it's just about having a great partnership. I mean, I just see that as a tailoring firm.
Do you think that tailoring without a client, how should I formulate this? Help me formulate this if I don't manage, right?
All right.
Does tailoring lose its value if there is no client? If there were no clients for the tailors, but tailors would just continue making for the sake of making, would tailoring as a craft lose its value, or do you think there are deeper values within the craft that are outside of the domain of serving a client in the best possible way?
Well, so I think, and I've heard this from lots of people, and it's always a bit of a joke in the industry that the clients are the worst part of the business. It would be such a great business if we didn't have any clients, because we wouldn't have to work to deadlines. We could perfect everything. But I think that's largely true with any industry. If Ford could just focus in on making the perfect car without having to, worry about sales and profits, as employees and owners, they would love that. But we all confined to, having clients and making sure that they're happy. I think the relevance of tailoring would be diminished, but the value of the techniques would remain. And it would be similar to techniques or traditions that have been lost to history that we know exist, but we do not know how they were implemented or the methodology that was used.
Right.
So, you hear about, I don't know. I mean, this is going to be a terrible example, like Stradivarius and, the pigment in the actual varnish. We don't know what was, what that pigment was. That has been lost to history. There is value in knowing what that technique was. Does it affect your garden variety violinist or your, professional violinist? No. But there's still value in it. Or there was a really famous, I think, late 19th, early 20th century designer that was who patented a way of pleating fabric. I learned about him when I was like 18. But his method was lost. And the pleats that he made kind of early 20th century are still look fairly good in the 21st century. And usually that doesn't happen. Pleats kind of fall, the way the fabric is treated and pressed, pleats will kind of usually kind of go flat over time. That technique has been lost. Again, does it affect the everyday clothing wearer? No. But there's value in that. And I think the same is true for tailoring.
Mm-hmm. Are you the type of person that thinks of tailoring as an art form or not?
No,
if you really had to go black and white.
No.
No, not an art form.
No.
Okay.
I think I akin it more to structural engineering or architecture. I think it's a very pragmatic. I think there are some tailors that add a lot of artistic elements that could arguably make it more of an art form. But I think that I have a real sense of purpose for why I make clothing. I like making clothes that can be lived in and worn and that fit, that are almost invisible kind of background scenery to someone's life.
Beautiful.
That's there. Yeah, but it's not at the forefront. And so that's why, I mean, even with how I'm trying to develop my style, it's much more soft-shouldered, less padded. It's about things that you can just move around in, lie down in. It's about living in rather than the uniform, that kind of military tradition that a lot of tailors go down, which is beautiful and I love to see. But I've never felt comfortable wearing those things. I like being able to kind of just like slump into a big cozy chair, and I want a jacket that will allow me to do that. Yeah.
Actually, we could talk about a lot of ideas forever. I'd like to talk a little bit more about you and your. We haven't even discussed what happened. What happened when you moved to London? Where did you go? Where did you learn? So let's talk a little bit about that, because I definitely don't want to miss that.
Yeah. I'll give you the abridged timeline, and you can just pick out any points you find interesting. I moved London September of 2007, and the only way I could get to London was by applying to a fashion school. So there was, and there still is, a bespoke tailoring program at London College of Fashion, which is what I applied to and got into. That was a 3-year degree. So I started that autumn 2007. I enjoyed the course, but I wanted to find professional experience as quickly as possible. And I heard that a relatively new tailor was looking for an intern. And that was in early 2008. So it was about March 2008. And I had never heard of the tailor before. It was called Tom Sweeney. And I got in touch with them. I had an interview. They liked what I was doing. And so I started working as an intern at Tom Sweeney while I was at LCF.
How was that? How did you manage going back and forth from LCF and a real tailor shop? Was that difficult?
Because when I was an intern, I was doing a lot of intern stuff. I was grabbing coffee for clients. I was, soaking canvases for the coat maker, helping him pad. I was just doing odd jobs.
And how old were you?
I was 20.
20, okay.
Yeah. So I did that, but I grew through. I became an undercutter. I was cutting, and I left Tom Sweeney in 2015. So summer of 2015, because I got married and I also enrolled at Oxford for a master's program in the history of design. So I took some time away from the industry it was only about a 6-month gap because I wanted to focus in on that. After getting married, I was like, I can take a little break. Went from Oxford that first term. I was on my own, and then I started working as a cutter at Dunhill, and I was that was 2016. So January 2016, I started at Dunhill, and I was doing Oxford and working at Dunhill at the same time, and I was doing their trunk shows in Japan. And I did that for a year before I was contacted by Huntsman, and Huntsman was looking for a new cutter. I came in for an interview. The guy seemed to like me, so I started at Huntsman. I think it was January 3rd, 2017, and I worked there until November 2020, and then I started my own business.
All right. Okay. I would like to know how the process of going from a work experience coffee bartender, floor sweeper person is to an undercutter. How did you make that transition? Like, it's a very natural thing. I mean, we've probably all done it. Whoever is a tailor and is listening to this, they probably have done coffees and errands and sweeping the floors and stuff like that. But then how was your transition from that to an undercutter and then a cutter?
It was, I mean, it's fairly seamless, because what happens, Tom Sweeney is such, now especially is one of probably the bigger tailoring firms in London. It's got a worldwide presence, in New York, and they do trunk shows. So they're a really big firm. That means in the early days when I was there was always an opportunity to pick up a tailoring, some tailoring job, whether it was pressing cloth to pre-shrink it for the cutter, or was, just finding patterns and laying it with the cloth to be cut. So you do the run to the alteration tailor, you get the coffee, and then you have some downtime. And so you ask, what can I do? When I started there, I would get there at 9, I'd stay till 6, and I wouldn't take a lunch. And they used to say, take lunch. I said, no, that's right. I'm fine. I'd rather just work. I definitely take lunches now.
Why did you not take a lunch? Tell me, why did you not take lunches?
Because I didn't want to have an hour where I could have done that tailoring bit. Right. I didn't want to go out. So I was just like, I'm going to be there. And I probably did that for the first year and a half, 2 years, where I would just, I mean, I might have like one if they would buy me like a sandwich when they would go out, but 9 times out of 10, I would just not eat when I was there, and maybe pick up like a power bar or something like on a trip to the alteration tailor compressor. And it was the idea for me, it was, if I go out for an hour, or if they think I'm on lunch for an hour, they're not going to ask me to potentially do that thing that I really want to do. When I had downtime, I would, I'd ask the cutter Tom if I could just watch him work. And I would just watch him work, and I would, we'd have, just conversation. And eventually that would be like, oh, well, do you want to try striking out these trousers? I'm really busy. And I would say, sure. And so he might write an email, and I would strike the trousers, and I wouldn't cut them out because he would check them and then he would cut them out. But that freed up the time for him to do something else. And that then slowly builds into, well, okay, you've struck out trousers 10, 15 times now. This is a plain cloth. Go ahead and strike them and cut them out. And then that builds into, okay, we'll do the same with a suit, do the same with, this overcoat. To the point where it's like, well, the draft, you've seen me draft, 1,000 times. Why don't you draft this, and I'll have a look at that. And if it looks good, I'll use that pattern. And then again, it just naturally develops. But for me, it was always about being there, being present, being able to say, I can do that.
And then the things you learned at Tom Sweeney, could you easily transfer them, for example, to another company like Huntsman?
Yes and no. There are certain ways that Tom Sweeney was working that was like they would do a different draft style of trousers at Tom Sweeney than I was doing at Huntsman. So you would just learn those. But because a lot of the techniques are the same, a lot of the equations are the same, you can amalgamate them after you have enough of experience. The same is true, because I went from Thomson to Dunhill, and there was a lot of overlap. And then I went into, there was a lot of overlap, but I always had to learn something new or different every time I made a jump.
Right. So, since I'd like to talk also about your business, I'm just going to skip a lot of things in between. So you started your own company. I remember we met up in Battersea Park about 2 years ago, something like that. Was it 2019, something like that? 2020, maybe?
I think, no, because I think we met up after I left Huntsman.
Yeah.
So that was a year ago. So it would have been probably December of last year.
Is that so? December last year.
Which goes to show you how much COVID has changed.
It feels like 3 years ago almost. That is weird. Okay, so you started your own company.
Yeah.
What was your motivation for it? Let's start with that, and then I have a few questions for that. What was your motivation?
Always wanted to start my own company. From the moment I started doing alterations in California, I had this aspiration, like most young people do, of having a business they can call their own, where they can do things exactly the way they want to do.
Right.
Very comfortable at every job that I had. And the silver lining, and the silver lining I need to say with a real asterisk, because a lot of people really suffered during the pandemic and a lot of people had a lot of uncertainty. I was unfortunately one of the many that were made redundant at Huntsman. It was the perfect opportunity for me to be forced to attempt the thing I always wanted to do.
Did you feel as if you were ready?
Yes and no. Being a cutter, I was ready to take measurements and cut patterns and fit and make and work with tailors and do all the timelines. I was not ready for social media posts and liaising with clients about every which way of things and getting bills. It seems like, and I don't know about you, it seems like I get a bill sent to me every single day and just managing payments of bills and doing all the administrative sides, ordering trims, making sure that I'm in for a parcel delivery, or I've set aside a safe space so the courier can leave it there without having to take it back to the team. It was all that logistical stuff that had normally been taken care of.
Yes.
That posed the greatest learning curve. And what it has done is made me have to really rethink my daily schedule as a one-man band, because I need to be able to make sure that tailoring is at the forefront, but I'm also able to do all of the other things that are required of me to do as a business owner.
Do those things make you still enjoy what you're doing, or kind of like, do you sometimes get fed up? It's like, oh man, this is not what I really wanted, setting up my own thing.
There are elements of it, because so you and I both have home workshops. My wife hates that I have a home workshop. I hate that I have a home workshop. My wife has her own business, so we have 2 small businesses and a small child and a very large Christmas tree, all in our house right now.
Right.
So things are just crowded and cramped, and I think that it's difficult because I live on, on the kind of border of Kent and London, down in the south. Going into London for a couple of appointments takes so much time out of my day. And if I have appointments that are spaced out, one at 11 and one at 2, I don't have enough time to come back home. So there's a lot of dead time in my day, which I think is probably the most frustrating part of my current setup.
Right.
I would much rather be able to have an 11 o'clock appointment, write up the fitting notes, and go straight into either what I was doing or recutting and remarking the fitting that I just had. Whereas now it's, well, I finished at 11:30 and I have, 2 hours, 2.5 hours until my next appointment. I'm not going to go home and come back just for 5 minutes of being at home.
So what do you do?
I'll try to meet with someone, maybe, meet with a friend for coffee. I'll maybe go to I'll find busy work, but it's usually work that is not essential and it's designed to pass the time.
Oh, I see. That is tricky. That is very tricky.
Yeah, really. Yeah, it is actually probably the biggest surprise, because I knew there was admin stuff. I knew there was bills to pay and there was emails. I didn't realize how inefficient it was to not be based permanently in London, in central London.
Yes, that is true. So would you say that apart from the challenges that you have logistically, that you have other challenges of being on your own from the tailoring side?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, finding new clients. That is a challenge. This year has been, is, even though it feels like it's gone on forever and we're not ever going to get out of it, it is still the anomaly. So social interaction is down, events are down. So I'm not able to get out and meet people. I'm not able to have people really see what I'm wearing. It's really funny because I've said to others, there is a big leap of faith for a new person to buy a suit from an independent like myself or like you or someone else, anyone else that we know. Because the first thing clients usually ask if I get a referral is, oh, where can I see you? Where's your shop? I've looked you up online. I don't see your shop. And you say, well, I don't have a shop. I work from my house. To tell someone you work from a house and then that you want them to send you £5,000 in a bank transfer, there has to be, an element of trust that this isn't just, and that's difficult because if I'm just getting a phone call, if I'm not meeting someone at a central location, or I've met someone at an event and, they've been introduced personally by an acquaintance or a friend, it is really hard to find people who are willing to make that leap.
Yeah.
So presumably once life gets back to normal, as we all hope it does, that element of growing the business will become easier.
Would you say that it's a good thing that, because since the pandemic, we did have, even before the pandemic, we had this sudden wave, at least in London, of a lot of tailors leaving the companies they were working for. I was one of the people in that wave, and then set up their own shop. I'm sure that's happening in pretty much every country that has a lot of tailors. Do you think that's a good thing, or is it irrelevant, kind of, or something else? And if you do think it's a good thing, if you say it's a good thing, why would it be a good thing, you think?
I think it's relatively neutral.
Neutral, okay.
There's going to be good elements to it, and there's going to be bad elements to it. And this is actually something we talked about when we met in Battersea a year ago. The more tailors there are, the more tailoring firms, independent tailoring firms there are, the more options, people who want bespoke tailoring will have. It will no longer. It's no longer just Savile Row, the big firms, or the few big independents. It's I can really find someone who represents me as the consumer. The negative is not all of those businesses will succeed.
Right.
There will be people who jump out on their own and who have to find another job in tailoring or will get out of the trade. And that's a shame, but business is difficult. It is hard to have your own tailoring shop. And there's the economic side of why tailoring is hard. The economic model of tailoring, I think, does not comport to normal retail. I'd probably have to double my prices if I wanted to follow a typical retail model. And that's without having a premises.
Yeah.
I mean, tailoring, we actually make tailoring as affordable as possible. I think all tailors do. And it's still deemed a luxury product.
True. That is true. What would you say, how do you look at, when you look at the tailoring industry, do you look at it in terms of Instagram, the industry, the community of tailors, or do you look at it like per country, or do you look at it per shop? How do you look at the tailoring industry?
I mean, you can look at it. It's almost like a dartboard. There's kind of concentric rings of groups. You can look at the worldwide global tailoring industry and how it's represented, in blog posts, in print media, on Instagram. I mean, that's all of us. We're all represented in some way, shape, or form on some form of multimedia, right? I don't think, when I talk about the industry, I mainly think of the London bespoke industry.
I see.
And that's only because I don't know or can speak for French tailors or Italian or even American tailors, because I don't know them personally, so I don't know what their ambitions are or what their goals are. So I always look at the kind of microcosm of London and all the tailors that are working with.
Right. And how would you say you see your business, your company fit within that community? Like, how would you describe your position within that community? Or at least, where do you aspire to be within that kind of like community? Because it's fairly new what you've done.
I'm hoping that it will grow to the point where I will have my own premises. I will be one of the kind of established tailors that is offering my interpretation of what timeless kind of silhouettes, bespoke silhouettes are. And I'm basing all of my source material off of the kind of romanticized nostalgia of 50s and 60s kind of post-war America. Kennedy's and the Rat Pack, all of that, but distilled for contemporary tastes. I think if I had someone walk down the street looking like Frank Sinatra, they would probably get some weird looks. So you can't just replicate the past. It's about finding the elements of the past that resonate with contemporary viewers and then incorporating that into the modern silhouette. So it's about, I always look at America in that era as confident, carefree, not seeing any limitations on what was possible. And that's how I want to create my brand. It's going to be it is based on wearing clothes that help you exude the confidence that exists within you, that make you feel like you can go into whatever you want, whether it is hang out with friends in an old club and just feel nice and cozy, or by a fire, or wearing an elegant dinner suit to a black tie event. It's about modulating how we are as people. Because one of my weird kind of pet hates is, as a society, and especially on social media, we love purity. This idea of purity exists within so much of what we consume visually. So, you want your whatever Instagram account that you follow, that you want them just doing images of food, and like that's all it should be. And if you're a food blog, that's all it should be. It can't be anything else. But that's not representative of who we are. And yes, that might distill very neatly an element that people are interested in. But as a tailor, I am making clothes for life, not only the longevity of for your lifetime, but also for your actual life. And we are not just a person who goes to black tie events every night. We are not a person who just walks around in 20-ounce flannel, woolen trousers every day. Not even wearing a tie it doesn't have to be, you have to comport to this silhouette, you have to wear a suit and tie. I want my suits to be able to be worn casually with jumpers instead of shirts, with roll necks, with ties. It has to be adaptable for the life we actually lead.
Well, do you think that a lot of that purity comes from the fact that because you are forced to squeeze yourself within an account, and within that account you are forced to squeeze your vision into all these small photographic squares, as soon as you start to make kind of like a weird random collage of very different things, people get confused maybe, and they're like, what's this account about?
Well, no, but funnily enough, I think it goes well beyond social media. I mean, if you look at film stars from let's say the 30s up until the late 80s, early 90s, you wouldn't have like the old cliche about actors would be like, I act, but I really want to direct. Like that you can't contain them, and how ridiculous is it that they want to direct? We were not accepting of people going outside of their box. And that, I think, is disappointing, because we now see, I think in the last 20 years, we actually see what happens when George Clooney makes tequila, and how profitable and how in demand it might be. That would have never happened 50 years ago. An actor was supposed to act, and that was it, and do publicity for their films.
So
go ahead.
Please continue.
Oh no, I just think that the same is true for clothing. I think that we always try to like neatly put into boxes like, oh, this brand is for this and this only. This brand is for that and that only. And they're great brands, but I think that they don't always fit the life that people actually lead. So we get elements, and then we pick and choose. So we go get like one shirt from here, and I want this from over there, and I want, and that's great. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it just doesn't. I've never felt like that represents me, so that's not how I'm going to build the brand that I want to create.
What do you think that if you, for example, go further, like 10 years further into time, and you look back at everything you've produced, whatever that may be, do you think you could sum everything you've made up in one word? Or the look, or the vibe, or the mood, or the theme, or the character? Could all of what you've made be summed up in one word? It has to be a kind of like a broad, general, vague word, of course. It can't be too specific. But if it was the case, what would that one word be?
That it is a very specific.
It's a difficult question. I know.
Yes, it's a very difficult question because, I don't know how I'm going to develop.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good answer.
I don't know. I can't say that I know what that word would be yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, I have a few words, and I'd like to know what the first thing is that pops up your mind. So if you're ready for a speed round, we could go into one.
Okay, speed round. All
right. So let's start with the first one. Made to measure.
Suit. The first.
Suit.
That's the first word.
Sure thing, man. Tailoring in the U.S.
I don't know. Nothing, like literally, I just keep on repeating tailoring in the U.S. because nothing. I don't have any feelings about it. Nothing. There's no point of reference.
All right, no point of reference. That's okay. That's a very
interesting. I can't think of anything like contemporary. Don't know.
Yeah, quality.
Essential.
The biggest challenge in tailoring.
Ready to wear.
Ready to wear. All right. Okay. What do you think of ready to wear?
That's technically 3 words, but I hope that works because it's a
sure. Well, but it's funny because next up I do have ready to wear. What do you think of ready to wear then?
I think ready to wear is genuinely getting very good.
Mm-hmm.
You can buy really well-made clothing,
mm-hmm.
and it is. I've seen guys who've come into a fitting or come into any one of the previous shops I've worked at wearing an off-the-peg ready-to-wear suit
mm-hmm.
and thinking it looks great on them.
Yeah. Okay.
So it is a big challenge for tailors because you have to then figure out why is tailoring going to be relevant and why is it going to be something that people want. And I think there's answers to that, but it's not just going to be well made and it fits. It's well made and it fits well.
Could you give like an abridged answer of how will tailoring be relevant in the future?
Tailoring will be relevant because there is value and desirability in things that are made by human beings.
Mm-hmm.
There is something that is poetic and romanticized in our heads about, a tailor who's been working all their lives
mm-hmm.
to make this one garment. This is they've perfected this.
Mm-hmm.
We love that. We love that whiskey is aged 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
I am sure there's probably some scientist who could manufacture that flavor profile, the
mm-hmm.
kind of aromatic, profile of a 40-year-old whiskey.
Yeah.
People buy it. It's why fake diamonds are not as valued as natural diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
There is something about being natural, being an extension of ourselves, being organic, that is comforting.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to break up the process of, a ready-to-wear, mass-produced, highly made suit versus a bespoke suit, the story in itself
mm-hmm.
is just at the ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
But you can make a mass. You'd have to talk about its ingenuity and the engineering and how precise everything is. Where on the other end, it's about the craft and the development and the pursuit of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
If I said to you, oh yeah, so your cloth is laid out in 100 layers deep, and a laser cutter comes by and it just slices everything out to millimeter precision, and then it goes on to a machine that cost £1 million, but it's specifically designed you talk about the kind of achievement of humanity and the technological achievement of what we've created to make this amazing suit. That's not the same language you would use about a bespoke suit.
Mm-hmm.
You start off with saying, we order the cloth to the exact length that we need for you. Mm-hmm. When it comes in, we take it down to an iron and we soak it, and then we take an iron and we press it so it shrinks before we cut it, because we don't want there to be any discrepancies. Mm-hmm. And that process takes this amount of time. Mm-hmm. And then we go down and we lay a piece of paper that was cut specifically to your measurements by our expert craftsmen, and they chalk it out like they did for the last 200 years. The language is different. That doesn't mean the products are better or worse than each other. It's just, I think that handmade artisan product will always have this comforting, desirable quality to it that you won't necessarily have from ready to wear. Mm-hmm.
Please remind me, because I don't want to go into this because this is another 2 hours. Please remind me for us to do another episode on what's the fine line between selling a story and selling an actual craft, right? Please remind me that, okay? Because I'm very, very interested in exploring that idea. Let's continue with the speed round for now. Tailoring schools. Fine. Workshops, tailoring workshops. Messy. Tailoring businesses.
Maybe mine. Say again?
Tailoring businesses.
Difficult.
All right. Architecture.
Challenging. Say again?
Architecture.
Impressive.
LA.
Home.
All right. Savile Row.
Traditional.
The most difficult thing in tailoring.
Ego.
Right. I've never heard. I haven't heard that yet in the speed round. So, regulations. You know, when people talk about, tailoring is not regulated and there is no authority of what quality is, and that kind of regulation.
So wait, regulations as in like there's no body that oversees tailoring?
Yeah.
Unnecessary.
The regulation is unnecessary.
No.
Good. Let's see. I think a few more. What was it? Oh, I think that's it. Oh, last one. The last one. Matthew Gonzalez. You, the person, not the brand. You, the person.
I don't know. Matthew Gonzalez, the person. I just want to I just have that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm really struggling to. Just like the 10-year question, I don't think I can sum myself up in a single word. There's not a single word that naturally comes. I just again see my name in my head.
Right.
There's too many things.
Well, what does your name for you mean for you? When you see your name,
well, that's the thing though. When you say the person, there's so much that when you say Matthew Gonzalez, the person, I'm sure just like you, images will come to your head when you hear certain things. My family comes to my head.
Okay.
My work comes to my head. The fact that I'm cooking right now comes to my head. There's so many things. I like to exercise. I like try all of those things. I don't think you can sum up any individual.
Sure.
Into a single word. I think that's a very difficult task to do.
Well, maybe I could ask the question in the sense of, because like you say, you can't just put one label on one complicated person that has so many dimensions. But if there was a main theme in your life, in your in your dreams, in your kind of like personality, something that is pretty much one of the main aspects of your thinking in your life, what would you say it is?
So I would say in my life, I tend to throw myself into things.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you would say like really passionate, like, but I like to, if I'm cooking something, I'll read 10 or 15 recipes and try to figure out what's the best recipe to do.
Curious, maybe?
Curious, yeah. Yeah, curious is a good one. But just but I like to throw like friendships. I like I like to have really intense, strong friendships. You know, with having a son, I try to be the best dad I can be and always there. It's that kind of intensity of I really just want to do everything I can to offer the best of myself to whatever I'm doing.
Great stuff,
but again,
man.
That's more than.
Yeah, but that's normal, man. That's fine. So it's acceptable. But thank you very much, Matthew. This has been a great conversation, and I think we should have another one because there are a lot of things that we kind of like went over for like 2 minutes, but actually they're like 1 hour or 2 hour conversations. So I thank you for your time.
Well, no, it was a pleasure. I'm really glad that you you wanted to have me on, and now that we've done the first one, I can actually see what everyone else says.
Well, I'd like to know your opinion on that. So so do let me know. But thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
And that was Matthew. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like to see more from Matthew, you can follow the links to his Instagram pages and his website in the description of this video. If you like the content that we've been putting out so far, please support us by subscribing to this channel, as we have got some interesting and exciting things lined up for the worldwide tailoring community. If you have any thoughts or comments, please let us know in the comment section, and I hope to see you again in the next episode. Until then, bye-bye.